Greetings, everyone. Koku here. I just wanted to remind everyone where we're at in this reading of Nation Building. Where we left off last time, we were in the section of the book that's discussing notes on African centered curriculum. And we were getting into the reasons for an African centered curriculum, the whys, the whos, the hows, etc. And the why, by now you should know, is education is what's necessary, a necessary prerequisite towards a nation state. Who should be involved in African Center curriculum? Well, there's basically a trinity here, right? Teachers, students, parents. Teachers, students, parents. You want to talk about redemption and trinities? That's the redemption that we need to latch on to. That's the trinity we need to uphold. Teachers, students, and parents. Sorry. The how, when you're talking about the reasons for African-centered curriculum, the how is the methods and the goals of an African-centered curriculum. That's what we're here to read tonight. Okay? So the why is that education is a prerequisite for nation states. The who, the trinity of teachers, students, and parents. And now tonight we'll talk about the methods and goals, otherwise known as the how. You guys stay tuned. We're going to start the reading the other side of this.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku. We're here tonight to continue our reading from the book Nation Building. And before we get into the reading, I want to remind you guys that this show is part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio. There are other shows on the network that you are invited to tune into.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the Revolutionary Matron on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure you guys are tuned in to all of those shows. Oni Say is still doing his mini-series on the open secret of how white society keeps dominant. So you guys want to check that out if you haven't been already. The Learning Curve is, she should be back regularly soon doing her show. The Learning Curve with the Revolutionary Matron and the Harsh Reality Podcast, I'm sure we'll be dropping something soon. All right. So this book, Nation Building by Akoto, we're reading about notes on African-centered curriculum and the reasons for an African-centered curriculum. We've talked about the why. As I said earlier, is for education being a prerequisite to nationhood. Talked about the who should be involved, teachers, students, parents. And now we're talking about the how, methodology, the methods and the goals of an African-centered curriculum. You guys have been enjoying the reading of this book. Please drop a 1 in the chat. Let everyone know that you've been enjoying what you've been hearing from this reading, Nation Building. How? Methods and goals. We have described the interaction of teacher and students as interactive, meaning that there is a vibrant exchange of information, mutual learning, and inspiration. This interactive and reciprocal act of communication between teacher and students is exemplified by the communal circle in traditional African societies. It is the circle with its counterclockwise motion that facilitates the spiritual communion in traditional spiritual systems. It was the circle with the family elder or griot at the head that facilitated the intergenerational flow of history and culture. It is thus the interactive circle, so potent and central to our cultural experience, that must be adapted for use in an African-centered pedagogy. That circle, which is explicitly collective and communal, can best facilitate the kind of dynamic and reciprocal discourse that is essential to the development of the truly liberated African personality. The circle is particularly well suited to facilitating the active participation of all its members, and it allows the teacher to easily adjust his or her posture from an egalitarian posture to that of a mediator, facilitator, lecturer, adversary, and various degrees in between. The circle is fluid enough that opportunity for students' initiatives and creativity is possible, and it can further the development of cooperative skills and a sense of reciprocity and mutual accountability. It can also facilitate the development of leadership and constituent skills. Speaking of reciprocity, if you're listening to my voice right now, that means you're listening to this episode of the Bitter Medicine Podcast, and you guys should be hitting the like button. Make sure you guys hit the like button. It helps small channels like this. Whenever you listen to other shows on KWAZ Radio, also hit the like button on those shows as well. To continue, the circle supersedes the mere stationary positioning of students and teacher in a circular arrangement. Central concern here is with the dynamic of the learning process, which a circular arrangement certainly facilitates. Interactive circle demands A, a constant reciprocal flow of ideas, B, actual physical movement by the teacher in order to vary his or her physical and psychic proximity, C, maintenance of a certain level of intensity and anticipation, and D, assurance of input, feedback, and attention to all students. Beyond the positioning and the interactive process, the circular dynamic is consistent with the African cultural cognitive style. Hilliard and Agbar, among other African-centered psychologists, have determined that the African cultural or cognitive style is characterized by the following. A, having circular cognitive organization. B, sociocentric. C, people-oriented. E, intuitive. F, rational. G, spontaneous. H, adaptive. I, holistic. J, altruistic. K, highly affective. L, inferential reasoning style. M, having non-verbal proficiency like body language, tonal nuance, etc. And N, pathic. The circular and holistic features of the African cultural cognitive style correspond with those cognitive processes that are associated with the right side of the brain. For the teacher or parent, it should be noted that neither hemisphere of the brain is entirely exclusive of the other, and that although the African brain centers and originates in the right, it is by no means limited regarding competencies associated with linear or analytical properties of the left hemisphere. It is also significant that the principal concern of the most advanced sciences is finding holistic solutions to scientific and technological problems. Those problems include parallel processing and computer design, the attempts at unified theories in physics and psychology, and the linkage of science, mathematics, and humanities by the emerging science of chaos. This concern with holistic solutions to the mysteries of the material world is an echo of the philosophy and scientific inquiries of ancient Kemet. Included here are two different graphic representations of the interactive circle. The initial representation focuses on the actual learning or teaching encounter and demonstrates the interactive roles of family, school, and community in that encounter. So let me just jump to figure 1 quick. All right, so you could see figure 1 here, all right, titled Social Placement of Learning, Teaching, Encounter. So you see on the outside at the top, on the northern direction of the circle is the national culture. The southern aspect is historical consciousness. Inside the circle, you have these segments: culture or ideology, spirituality, psychic, affective, and socio-political or economic, right? So that's directly inside the circle. And within those 4 categories, we then have family, right? Intact, supportive family, substantive school involvement, cultural ideological alignment, cultural and academic reinforcement. And if we go anti-clockwise, we go next to school, which is school environment, comprehensive and cultural centered curriculum. Makes sense. Keep going, we have the teacher, right? Content mastery, pedagogical command, ideological clarity, personal commitment, cultural involvement, and finally, community. Before you get back to family, the community says community support, involvement of leadership, and productive components, right? So that's the first circle, figure 1. Let's go back to the reading. Second representation is intended to demonstrate the complementary roles of the principal actors in the whole enculturation process. Those actors are family, teacher, school, and community. So those are the actors that I described on the just on the interior of the circle. Those actors and students are further interlocked by 4 connective elements in the collaborative effort that enculturation requires: A, ideological alignment and mutual growth; B, mutual commitment and accountability; C, cultural alignment and involvement; and D, physical proximity with substantive interaction. They say that's figure 2. So the way this book is kind of set up, and you can see basically what I read if you're watching this live, right? You can see family, teacher, school curriculum, family, teacher, school curriculum, community, or nation. And you see that those major concepts are connected by students and the enculturation process. The students and the enculturation process are the center of this. This connects them to family. This connects them to teacher, connects them to school curriculum, and it connects them to the concept of community or nation. And within this paradigm, there's these connective tissues of cultural alignment and cultural alignment and involvement between the school curriculum and community or nation, right? Which makes sense. What you're doing in school, the reason why you have an African Centered curriculum is to reunite African students, African learners, with their culture, with their community, and ultimately with their nation. Public school system separates them from all those things. Okay? So it's supposed to be a cohesive type of thing where you're connected and connecting and reconnecting culture, community. And it's the same thing with problem solving. You're problem solving culture, community, in your nation. So there's connective tissue between the community and nation and family, physical proximity with substantial interaction. That makes sense. There's a connective tissue between family and teacher, which is ideological alignment, mutual growth. And then there's a connection between teacher and school curriculum, which is mutual commitment and accountability. By the way, if you guys want this book, it's on the Discord. Click the link at the top of the chat or down in the description, and you can have a copy of this book yourself. The dynamism of the discourse within the interactive circle is what Freire describes as dialogical education. The essence of dialogical education is dialogue, which is the encounter between men mediated by the world in order to name the world. It is the encounter in which the united reflection and action of the dialoguers are addressed to the world, which is to be transformed and humanized. Dialogue or reciprocal discourse between teacher and students reaffirms the humanizing, civilizing feature of language. This very human interaction, even at preschool and primary levels, most effective when used according to the child's cognitive level. At this academic level and every level, the assorted manipulanda of text, computers, assorted visual aids, etc., are secondary, sometimes non-essential reinforcement media. Often the excessive use of manipulanda fosters the individualistic, materialistic focus of Western society, thereby undercuts the communalistic and collaborative nature of learning in an African-centered context. Furthermore, the reliance on manipulatives diminishes the teacher's responsibility as the primary humanizing conduit, cultural regeneration. Manipulatives alone cannot teach. More fundamental skill for the teacher is the ability to manipulate language in such a way as to excite and direct the cognitive process of students. Dialogue is perhaps more graphically demonstrated in the relationship between the traditional master drummer and the master dancer. And here's an excerpt. Quote, "The dancers move and the musician finds the corresponding sounds." Is dialogue. Visible waves of body movement that seek and are answered by audible waves of music. Dialogue continues. Sometimes it becomes a debate, competition. End of quote. The relationship of the students to the teacher is like that of the drummer to the dancer. The drummer allows the lead of the dancer, and in this dialogue, both are challenged and inspired to greater heights of artistry than anticipated. Ultimately, both dancer and drummer and the dance itself are transformed. Dialogue assumes a cultural and ideological context. That context is defined in different ideological perspectives on the reality of physical, spiritual, and socio-political conditions of a given culture. Dialogue occurs as the teacher seeks to illuminate the historical and contemporary relationships, processes that constitute that reality. Thereafter, or during that process, the teacher engages the students in critical and creative examinations of those processes and relationships. During the examination, both teacher and students, whose interests are social, cultural, transformation, reconstruction, are themselves transformed. That's what I say. Like, in this case, they're talking about the teacher and the student, which makes sense, especially when you akin it to the drummer and the dancer. But you know who's also transformed when they're fully immersed and fully participant? The parents of the learners. And that's why I say that adult education shouldn't much differ from child education. I talked about this in the past. Marcus Garvey and my grandparents and folks from yesteryear in the Caribbean, especially. I would assume in the Caribbean and in the continent as well. Maybe even down south in America too. And if you guys know this for sure, what I'm about to say that it applies to Southern blacks in America at one time, you guys by all means post it up in the chat or post it in the comment section. But my grandparents and them went to what they call an all-age school, where it wasn't necessarily divided by age groups or grades per se, but everyone who attended learned together. And like in the case of even say Booker T's Tuskegee Institute, in fact, I think I was talking about it during a reading of a paper on Booker T's Tuskegee Institute. When the older kids started to get to the point where they understood these lessons, they became like the teachers. They started to assist the learners who were coming up. And in fact, back in the day, that's how a lot of women became teachers. They reached a level, they were seen to be good nurturers, etc., good educators, and that's how they became teachers. Right? So I'm almost certain that was the case in at least some of the South in America at one time. But that was the thing in the Caribbean at one time, those all-age schools. And so this idea that you separate adult education from children or early education, child education, I think that's something that we need to reconsider. I think there's room enough for our adults to learn from an African-centered education. When I listened to D. Webb from the Harsh Reality podcast, and he was talking about the work he does with Keprel from Melanated Conscious Society, and I've interviewed Keprel before. You guys could go back in the archives if you haven't heard that interview. And Keprel and them, D. Webb was talking about how Keprel and them, the most fight and resistance they ever see in the work that they do, and they're down there trying to educate young minds as well, is from the parents. I think when we start talking this African-centered education, we definitely need to have parents involved. And something Onitase said in the recent episode that he did about the open secret that I think is absolutely something to keep in mind as well. When you have when you've created an African-centered curriculum, for example, one of the things I think is overlooked oftentimes is folks don't get an elite to co-sign that education. When I say co-sign, I ain't talking about you put your stamp on it, you show your face in an event. I'm talking about you're supposed to be getting elite, so-called elite black folks to have their children or the children around them passing through this education as well. So that when they speak of the virtues of this African-centered curriculum, because it comes from the so-called elite, right? It goes a long way in getting other African, Black equals African people involved in this education as well, right? So that's something to think about. You want to create a curriculum that the adults involved can also learn something, and their enthusiasm will concretize, right? The enthusiasm and the dynamic that is shared between the students and teacher. To continue. Genuine dialogue initiated within the interactive circle and or directed by the teacher must aggressively engage the students in intellectual exchange, which exchange arises out of the work that is oriented toward general cultural ideological goals. Goal of reconstruction and reinvigoration of African culture and the rebuilding of the African nation world must be the ultimate objectives of all pedagogy. Each teaching, learning, encounter must be informed by that objective. Pursuit of that objective, the independent schools under the structure of the Council of Independent Black Institutions, or CIBI, have found it effective to incorporate valuing objectives as key components of instruction. Those valuing objectives employ the principles of the Ngozi Saba, 7 principles, as a vehicle for imparting values that are consistent with and derivative of the ultimate objective. Principles of the Ngozi Saba include umoja, which is unity, kuji chagalia, which is self-determination, ujima, which is collective work and responsibility, ujama, which is cooperative economics, nia, which is purpose, kuumba, which is creativity, and imani, faith. You guys will remember I ended last year, each day doing an episode of the show. Each day I did an episode in honor of each of these principles, right? You guys can go check that out. I might do it again this year as well. Consciousness of those ultimate cultural ideological goals will be less developed in the young students. With the younger mtoto or child, teacher must engage them in dialogue that employs language and concepts appropriate to the child's cognitive development and performance level. So that right there can be somewhat debated. Obviously, you have to speak to a child. Obviously, you have to speak to a child in a way that the child can understand. You don't want to confuse them just in trying to communicate with them. But as I talked about before, and I referenced something the pro-Black perspective was talking about, you definitely have to understand that children can understand and deal with much more than what we, by way of these Europeans, these Eurasians, our enemies, right, can understand and handle much more than we give them credit for. And so what you would really want to do here is that even though the language might be simplified to communicate, the body of work that they're introduced to and the level of work that they're introduced to doesn't necessarily have to follow what it is, say, the public school system is doing. I'll tell y'all, I had a, in fact, all my kids were like this. When they were in certain grades, they started to act out because honestly, and you know, they had Black teachers too. And the Black teachers would say, like, these kids are more advanced than what we're doing. And I would have to go in there and say, well, can you challenge him more? If you recognize that, listen, he's reading 1 or 2 levels above this grade or whatever, well, then challenge him. And I'll do the same at home. You know, that's something that we have to keep in mind too, right? The teacher must create a physical environment of displays, learning centers, and activities within the classroom that reflect not only the cognitive level of students, but also the level of cultural ideological consciousness that the teacher determines is within the grasp of the students. And that's what I'm talking about. Teacher has to put quote unquote feelers out there to ascertain what level these students are on. Just because they're the age for grade 1 doesn't necessarily mean you teach them what these other folks are teaching children at grade 1. Challenge them, give them grade 2 work, etc. The development of those abilities requires several elements, including the teacher presence described earlier. It also requires that the actual content of the lessons reflect a balance of 3 considerations. A, school, community, prescribed curriculum content. B, students' interests. C, subject matter and activities that the teacher, mindful of the students' expressed interest and demonstrated readiness, determines to be appropriate. Practically speaking, the teacher will utilize a variety of teaching or assisting strategies during the course of a structured learning experience. though it is imperative that the teacher remain conscious of the ultimate cultural ideological goal or macro objective, the actual teaching, facilitating, assisting process would encompass three broad phases. Those phases include didactic, A, didactic, B, dialogic examination and analysis, and C, synthesis and application. Each phase has corresponding strategies and content and cognitive objectives. Phases are not exclusive of each other and may indeed occur simultaneously. Teacher must remain aware that each instructional phase and the entire teaching learning encounter is aimed at cognitive reconfiguration. Cognitive reconfiguration refers to that process of altering existing patterns of thought and valuation and stimulating or coaxing into action and directing the student's self-generative abilities to create new patterns. The teacher must recognize that the difference between imposed patterns of thought and valuation on the one hand, and that process that is self-generated in free association with the culture collective on the other, is a difference between propaganda, teaching from the perspective of a humanizing, African-centered pedagogy. The mission of African-centered education echoes the objective of Pan-African ideology: cultural, political, economic, and spiritual reconstruction and liberation of the African world. Within that broad mission, the objective of a pedagogy of liberation and nation building is to facilitate the reordering of the student's existent cognitive processes, further to rehabilitate dormant structures unaffected by encounters with white supremacy. Additionally, it aims to facilitate the development of new processes that complement the new spiritual, political, cultural order, processes that are fully aligned with the traditional African cultural historical continuum. Finally, pedagogy must serve as midwife, the birth of a re-Africanized, liberated thinking human being. So we didn't talk about this yet, but this is figure 3, teaching, facilitating, assisting process. And so we did just talk about the 3 phases: the didactic, the dialogic examination and analysis, and what was the third one again? Actually, we did say it was figure 3 here: synthesis and application. Sorry. So we did. So during didactic, the strategies would be modeling, lecture or instruction, and 3, practice and drill. Modeling, lecture, instruction, practice, and drill. That's the strategies for that phase. The content and cognitive objectives would be basic skill, concept, competence, conceptualization, recall and translation, and the ideological themes would be foundations and identity. That makes sense. The second phase, the dialogic examination and analysis, the strategies for that would be discussion and questioning, inquiry training, collective investigation. The content and cognitive objectives would be general command of content and skill, critical thinking, which involves relevancy, credibility, bias, logical consistency, etc. Also, some of the content would be interpretation, extrapolation, analysis, where you compare, contrast, and classify. There'll be identifying goals, and they'll be analyzing and ranking alternatives. The ideological themes during that time would be harmony, rhythm. Right? The third phase, which is synthesis and application, you would have the strategies being role-playing or like dramatizations, simulation and enactment, theory construction and evaluation, project construction, and the the ideological theme would be independence and spirit. All right, what do you guys think about those three phases? What do you think about the strategies during each phase? What do you think about the content that accompanies those strategies? What do you think about the ideological themes, right, during those phases? I think it's solid. But what do you guys think? Do you think something is missing, for example? Right? Okay. So let's continue. Progressive development of cultural consciousness of the students will correspond with their relative cognitive abilities. In the instance of preschoolers, primary and early middle school students, the teacher provides the cultural, ideological focus and objectives. That focus is an implicit, essentially, and essential component of that teacher's presence, described earlier, and must be a prominent feature in the character of the teacher. During the course of the middle and high school years, a progressively more ideological focus is provided by the community and nation. Students must be aware and visibly affected by the power of the teacher's cultural conviction, purposefulness, and ideological clarity. See, that's a thing too. You got to practice what you preach to. And it's something that I am trying to reconcile within myself. When you, it's like, for example, Garvey and them did it, I guess, more like how we do it now, I guess. Versus, ideally, you should probably want to do something that has more of an African aesthetic. But Garvey and them like walked around in like graduation, like college graduation garments and stuff like that, right? Showing that these guys were thought leaders and educated folks, you know, of the movement. And it was supposed to inspire others coming along to want to do the same. I think we have to start doing that too. If we really want to talk about being Pan-Africanists, if we really want to talk about being African-centered, then we should carry the look of our ideologies. You understand? And let me say this to be clear too, not in this kind of grifter, corny way that a lot of these dudes do. Like you'll see Uma and them do this kind of stuff. You know, I'm not necessarily talking about kente cloth and all that kind of stuff, but there's supposed to be something identifying where another Black equals African person is supposed to wonder and ask you, yo, what part of the continent you from? There's supposed to be something, right? If you're really so immersed, and if you're really so anti-imperialism, anti-colonialist and all that kind of stuff, there's something that's supposed to make people know you're about something outside of this bullshit. And for the students, for the learners who come in, be it child learners or adult learners, they're supposed to see this thing about you too. You feel me? My father at one time, in having a lot of like African socialist leanings and stuff like that, my father at one time had said to me, like, when anytime you move around, you're supposed to, and I still do it for the most part to this day, supposed to walk around with a bag over your shoulder, like a messenger bag type thing, and a book. And Garvey talked about this too, a book to write down notes in, and a book that you're reading. Like, never be without some reading material. So when you go and you sit down amongst other African folks, you're supposed to have something in your hand, a book or something that shows where you're coming from. And we got to get back to that kind of thinking. You know, it should be clearly visible, and it should make people around you aware where you stand, and what's your ideological focus. You know, to continue, that focus is an implicit and essential component of that teacher presence described earlier. Must be a prominent feature in the character of the teacher during the course of the late, middle, and high school years. Progressively, more ideological focus is provided by the community and nation. Right? The students must be aware and visibly affected by the power of the teacher's cultural conviction, purposefulness, and ideological clarity. And that's something, you know, I made that promise at the end of last year. I think I want to make this promise for the next year and beyond. This has to be essential. Right? This has to be essential. Folks need to be aware. I don't care about concept of folks might sabotage you and all this stuff. You could have your movements could be silent, but the way you move could be understood. Right? What's understood don't have to be explained. And folks, when they see you're supposed to understand what you're really about, right? Equally important is the explicit elaboration of those cultural ideological goals throughout the formal instruction, as well as through less direct means, including the teacher's chosen mode of dress. What was I just talking about? Appearance, language, vocabulary, and tonal nuance, social interactions. I think I talked about this a couple weeks back. I had an aunt who was a teacher. She was a high school teacher at my high school. And I remember her getting upset with a younger brother of hers, one who I grew up in the same household. 'Cause I was raised by my grandparents. And she was saying, look, if this kid here, meaning me and other grandchildren who were around, if this kid here doesn't see you pick up a book ever and read a book, how can you get on these kids about reading? You want to practice what it is you're preaching. When I was growing up, I didn't learn how to ride a bike as a kid. I learned to ride a bike as an adult. When I got serious about being a cyclist, so to speak, is when my kids were young, and I said, you know something? I'm going to want them to be active and learn how to ride a bike while they're still children. So what did I go and do? Of course, someone's leaning on the goddamn horn out here. So what did I do? When I realized, my kids are small and they're getting to that age where they can learn to ride a bike, I got serious about it. I went and bought myself a bicycle, and I started riding to work. And I started riding around, and then I taught my kids at an age-appropriate time how to ride a bike. You can't just talk about shit. You got to be about it. You can't just send them out there and say, hey, how come y'all ain't riding no bikes and playing outside and doing things out in the real world when you're not outside doing things in the real world? Well, I hate when someone's blowing their horn like that, because you might be blowing your horn for one person in mind, but everyone else hears it, right? Yeah, so you gotta, and that's something I'm going to implore all you guys who are listening, man. Practice what you preach and make yourself visible. Because, listen, the things that harm us, like religion, those folks who practice that stuff, they're visible. When you see them, and you see them walking with a messenger bag over their shoulder, and they pulling out tracts and New Testaments and all that type of stuff, They're serious about what they're doing. And we lose our people to that imagery. When Creflo Dollar and them are riding around in big time limos and all that stuff, what they're doing is trying to show the people that their God works. Look how prosperous I am. It's through this God that I keep telling you about. So you need to be about this God too if you want to be where I am. And black folks have this thing, we like to see our leaders, and well, some leaders, we like to see our priests and reverends and all that stuff balling out for some reason, right? Meanwhile, like Onita Say was talking about in his recent show, the recent episode of his show, Dr. Clark and them died in poverty. And it's funny that he said he met Dr. Clark. I too met Dr. Clark. He had Dr. Clark at the college I went to. Right? We had Dr. Ben as well. And so, we got to start being about it. We can't look and sound like everyone else and then get on the internet and just start yapping about Pan-Africanism or African-centeredness. We got to start really being about that. All right, let me finish this section here. Also necessary are classroom displays and the level of teacher expectations. Dialogue in this fashion is fundamentally generative and undertaken as an essential component of a comprehensive educational program. Its outcome goes beyond mere transformation, which implies an alteration of the same substance. It instead births a new social order and a new person, a liberated personality. That new social order and that liberated personality are thereafter sustained by the very dialogical methodology, the give and take that brought them into existence. All right, this guy is just going to lean on the horn. The necessity for the teacher to elaborate those cultural ideological goals is not to be confused with attempts to stifle critical and creative thought. It simply recognizes that all knowledge is culturally determined, given the hegemonic nature of European culture and the dominance and intractability of the media and institutionally based perpetuation of that culture. Teacher, as well as parents, school, and community, must consciously provide beacons that illuminate the truth of our history, our current condition, and our future as a people. The teacher would betray their mission were they to engage in actions that discourage creative and critical thought, that divorce their dialogue from the reality of the African struggle for cultural, historical truth and national reconstruction. Our children's commitment to this struggle and to the culture and ideology can only come through the exercise of their individual thought processes. That is, through the knowledge and discovery of historical truths, through comparison, hypothesizing, and testing, through debate, trial, and application, through analysis and synthesis, through creative and critical thinking, through problem resolution processes, and through final evaluation and decision-making. In the absence of thoughtful and engaging dialogue, referenced on creative and goal-oriented work that portends the presence of indoctrination and propaganda, propaganda seeks to, quote, invade the whole man, to lead him to adopt a mystical attitude and reach him through all possible psychological channels, and it does not tolerate discussion. It excludes contradiction and discussion. I was talking briefly to the revolutionary matron on the Discord. You guys can join the Discord too. He was talking to me about this Asian guy, these Asian folks. And I saw this story briefly, like in 2018 or something, 2019. but apparently it's reared its head completely as of late. These Asians are talking about a church of guns or something like that. Well, what did the matron say it was called again? Guns for God, right? And these dudes are talking about, church worship with AR-15s and all that kind of stuff, right? And, we're not doing anything like this. And the matron was like, yo, why do we feel like we have to be pacifists and 100% historically correct? We need to send out our propaganda and keep it moving and never stop. He said it's like a stream of African consciousness. And that's exactly what this book is talking about right here. You deal in propaganda and indoctrination, positive for your people. You don't tolerate no discussion about it. It excludes contradiction and discussion. But we want to be on some other bullshit. And this is why we make these small, very small steps. So I'm going to put that out there again to you guys. Be about positive indoctrination. Like the Christians say, wear the whole armor of God. Well, wear the whole armor of what we're into here. We're the whole armor of wanting an African nation. We're the whole armor of wanting the prescribed African Centered Education you need to get to nationhood. If you're into Africanist and Pan-Africanist thought and theory, don't act like you're not. If you're into, for example, the shows here on KWAZ radio, let people know you're into those shows and invite people to be into them too. Shout out to the Revolutionary Matron again. She set up a merch store for us where you can get, if you like all the shows on KW, you could support all the shows by purchasing a t-shirt in your size for every show that's here and wear them. Let people see that you're about this thing for real. One of the things once I started this whole thing about, I do the Saturday night shoot the breeze, not Sunday, Saturday night shoot the breeze. And I was doing the t-shirt giveaway, which I'm going to bring back soon too, by the way. And give away t-shirts from some of the other shows based on the prompts, what's the best prompt of the night or the best comment of the night on the Saturday night shoot the breeze, and give away a pro-black perspective t-shirt. Why not? Take pictures in it when you win one. To post the pictures up and let people see it on social media. We have to start putting on the whole armor of this Pan-Africanist thought that we say we have. We have seen occasion where well-intentioned teachers in independent schools and cultural enrichment programs have approached child and adult alike as mere psychic receptacles to be filled with historical truth. This truth, thus implanted, is then expected to neutralize the psychic and spiritual distortions or disorders born of miseducation and birth a new person. In actuality, this approach denigrates the intellectual capacity of the students and implicitly places the teacher in a dominant position similar to the hegemonic position of Eurocentric culture. There is no rebirth here, only dogma and the frail trappings of fragmented cultural consciousness. Both dogma and incomplete consciousness fail ignominiously when confronted by strong argument, material inducements, or the relentless propaganda of the popular media. I want y'all to take that in for a second. This thing has to be connected. This is not a finger wagging thing. This is not talking down and punching down on people who didn't have the knowledge or what have you. This is not merely talking history like I've talked about before. You can have all this knowledge of history, but if you ain't using it to do something, what's the point? And in actuality, because it's not fully immersed, it's just these factoids that, like Snapple facts that people have. The reality then becomes someone with a strong argument. Or like they say here, someone who can come and allure you with material trinkets, nigger trinkets, right? Or just a simple propaganda that's on TV and radio every goddamn day, TV, radio, and social media every day on the hour, every hour. You're gonna be lost to that stuff. Let me tell y'all something. I was talking to some quote unquote street dudes the other day. We happened to get in a conversation. And those dudes, kinda to my surprise, was like talking to me about some Malcolm X stuff. And then one dude talked to me about some Khalid Muhammad stuff. Now they'll go and stomp out a black person 5 minutes later if you give them a chance. But the reality is, these folks know some of this stuff. But you know what they know much better? The shit that the popular media puts up. That they supposed to have beef with someone wearing a complementary color different than theirs. That they supposed to be at war with someone living on a block different than theirs. These guys know who MLK is. They know who Malcolm X is. They know who Khalid Muhammad is. They might not have all the information. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Too many of the children and adults who have matriculated through our programs have abandoned the African Centered Cultural Framework because we were not successful in reaching them psychically and spiritually. We erroneously assume that the truth alone, once presented, would set them free. Truth alone ain't enough. Knowledge alone ain't enough. History, factoids, that's not enough. We naively underestimated the relentless and hypnotic effect of Eurocentric social propaganda. It is true that many of our people are so culturally alienated that engaging them in meaningful interaction is impossible. And when I read stuff like that, that's my reminder. Can't save every goddamn body. But I still believe you have to make some efforts. And really, the efforts have to be with the youth. Earlier the better. Task of the teacher is to make the teaching learning experience of the interactive circle sufficiently intense, stimulating, and comprehensive as to both counteract the Eurocentric cultural hegemony and facilitate the self-determined, creative, and critical synthesis, discovery, and commitment to a self-reflective cultural formation, African-centered nationality. The battlefront for the Africans in America is the consciousness of our people. The dominant culture will use every vehicle at its disposal to maintain its grip on that consciousness. Is the teacher confident, capable, and committed, employing a broad repertoire of techniques within the interactive circle, who stands as the first sentinel in the war to recapture our people's minds, engender the liberated African personality, and reconstruct the African nation or world. And that's the end of that section. Right? The next section is called Towards an African-Centered curriculum. When we pick up next time, this is where we'll be. And I hope that by the time we pick up next week here, I hope that some of you too have decided to either now or, you know, a lot of people like to make New Year's resolutions, either now or on this upcoming New Year. I hope you guys, this upcoming Roman New Year, I hope you guys are willing to say, hey, it's time I started showing and proving who I am and what I'm about, right? As I grow as a person, my vow is that this show that I do will likewise grow. And at some point in the next few years, it will have a more immersed and entrenched African centeredness to it that will be undeniable. Will be undeniable. And I hope you guys will be working to do the same. Again, I'm going to mention Onitase in his recent episode. He talked about how, your stance or your ideologies can kind of change over time. He talked about where he was when he wrote Zuberi and the Maroons of Ma'ah. It's different writing than when he wrote the Pro-Black Compendium, which was different from when he wrote the Book of Power. That's the progress that you should be seeing. In Zuberi, he was writing about, and I have Zuberi too, he was writing about an African satellite nation in the West. You listen to Onitase talk now, he doesn't even really talk about, he doesn't talk about African satellite nations. I talk about that more. Vis-a-vis the Caribbean and stuff like that. Right? You gotta change. Now, as you go along, each year you're supposed to put on another piece of the armor of this Afrocentricity, this Pan-Africanist ideology. Before I go, again, we're going to pick up right here next time towards an African-centered curriculum. So you can see now we're getting to the heart of the construction of this curriculum. But we're laying the groundwork now, especially in this last 2 episodes. We're really laying the groundwork of that triumvirate, that trinity, that holy trinity, if you will, of the student, teacher, and the parents. All of us here fit at least one of those roles. We're either a parent, we are a student ourselves, right? Or we are potential teachers. We got to start stepping up more. We got to really be armored up, so to speak, if we're gonna really stand up here and take on this role, because it's a battle, and the armor is what's going to protect you in the battle. Before I go, I want to remind you guys, check out the other shows on KWAZ Radio.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the revolutionary matron on KWAZ Radio.
Sorry about that. Someone came to the door. Apparently, the person blowing their horn thought it was my car outside. So I had to correct them on that. But anyway, so check out those shows on KWAZ Radio. Lastly, if you or someone you know would seem to be interested in being a host of a show on the network, you should listen to this.
Have you ever considered joining KWAZ Radio? Each of our hosts shares their unique perspective with you. You might have a perspective that needs to be shared. If that's true, hit us up at kwaz.radio@gmail.com. What are you gonna do? What you gonna do?
Yes, indeed. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? I want to thank you guys for being here tonight, taking this in. Drop your comments. Let me know what you thought of the reading. Let me know what stood out to you in tonight's episode. Make sure you hit the like button before you leave. Let me know that you were here. I'll be back again next week, continuing this series on nationhood. But you know I'll also be back on Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as well as Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, to do the Saturday Night Shoot the Breeze, which is always a good time. Until next time, folks, you guys be good. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.